CISO Series, it's cybersecurity headlines.
Twitter whistleblower compares it to Equifax, insurer balks at covering state-backed attacks, and white hats demonstrate satellite hacks. These are some of the stories that my colleagues and I have been bringing to you on this week's cybersecurity headlines. And now we get a chance for some insight, opinion, and definitely some expertise on these stories and more from our guest, John McClure, the CISO at Sinclair Broadcast Group. John, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having me, Rich.
All right, before I move on, we of course have to also thank our sponsor, Code 42, Insider Risk Management, Data Exfiltration, Visibility. Join us on YouTube Live. That's right, we're on YouTube. Go to CISOseries.com, look for the Week in Review page. You can find the link there, or just meander on over to YouTube, and we can't wait for you to join us. We won't wait, though, because we only got about 20 minutes, so let's just jump right into it. Ex-security chief accuses Twitter of cybersecurity negligence. Pieter Zatko, Twitter's ex-security chief, who was fired back in January 2022, has blown a big old whistle on Twitter's cybersecurity practices, filing a complaint with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, alleging that thousands of employee laptops contained full copies of Twitter's source code. It claims that many of those devices were insecure. He also alleges Twitter failed to reliably delete user data after account cancellation, and that employees repeatedly installed spyware on their work computers at the request of external organizations. Ouch. Zatko said Twitter experienced roughly one security incident per week during his 2-year tenure, and indicated that he reasonably feared Twitter could suffer an Equifax-level hack. So, John, I mean, these are some pretty earth-shattering revelations, and not even the ones that are getting the most press, I feel like, at this time. Obviously, with everything going on with Elon Musk, the bot, anything related to bots and spam accounts is kind of getting all the headlines. I'm curious, though, what are your take on the security side?
Yeah, it was a really fascinating, discussion and kind of what he threw out there. And he's always been a bit of a rebel, right? Mudge in his early days, for sure. So he's a character in and of himself. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things kind of turn out. Obviously, huge, if true, shocking revelations for sure. A lot of people put a lot of trust into that platform around the globe. Us specifically leverage it quite a bit, right, for information across broadcasts, across media, etc. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out. We did see, Twitter's response, right, about him being fired and perhaps that he's a disgruntled kind of former employee. We'll see how that turns out. But it was shocking for sure. I think also you saw a lot of the CISO community actually push back as well, right, on whether that was appropriate for him to kind of use that media platform to do that. And you've seen some CISOs thinking that perhaps that should have been handled a bit differently.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting that this also came, I mean, at least the time of his firing also was a time where Twitter was transitioning roughly around the same time to a much more engineering-minded CEO with Parag Agrawal. So I wonder if those two are related. I'm sure we'll get some more disclosures as various lawsuits go through. So we'll keep everybody updated as we get more developments on that for sure. But a big whistle blown by Mudge in this case. Next up here, state-backed attacks excluded from cyber insurance. Next March, Lloyd's of London will introduce exclusions in cyber insurance policies to no longer cover catastrophic state-backed attacks. Lloyd's warns that all insurance underwriters need to make policies very clear that state-sponsored attacks fall outside of coverage, regardless of any or declared or undeclared war between two countries. This last statement reflects the fact that state-sponsored attacks often aren't directly after financial gain. John, over the past 2 years, we've seen a preference by organized cybercrime gangs to shape campaigns around known coverage amounts, and paired with that, a growing reluctance from insurance companies to kind of pay up or to, much more carefully couch what they are going to be covering. How significant is this for business going forward?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I mean, the last couple of years, you've just seen an incredible hardening of that market, right? I mean, higher bar to entry in terms of actually getting coverage. You've seen coverages coming down. You're seeing companies have to self-insure quite a bit up front on their own. And it's interesting kind of the way they're leveraging some of this language in terms of declared or undeclared. Seems like there's a lot of wiggle room in there, perhaps on the insurance side, right? To say, oh no, that was definitely state sponsored. That was definitely undeclared. I think you've seen, again, more and more companies not even being able to carry insurance, as opposed to 2 or 3 years ago. Everybody was that was table stakes, and it was looked as a major way to kind of mitigate some risk, or at least transfer some of your risk into an insurance policy to cover you on the financial side. But I don't think, I think you're going to see more companies shying away from it as that market continues to harden. You're going to see some people, for sure, I think, that have some regulatory requirements, or very, very large companies that feel exceptionally targeted, perhaps continue to dip their toe there. But you got a $10 million company or a $20 million company, and you need to self-insure for the first 25 million. Probably not something you'd pursue.
Yeah, for sure. It's super interesting how it's responding, and kind of how ransomware across like business operation, like across entire businesses, has such not just ransomware, I should say, but state sponsored attacks have, they fall beyond so many different boundaries, right? Where it's not just a security issue, it's not just an operational issue. It's not even just a business continuity issue, and even it going into the insurance side of it as well. So just interesting how that strains a lot of the things businesses take for granted in a lot of ways.
Yeah, agreed. And in many cases, to your point, right, it's not just operations or cyber. I mean, it's reputational. It's all kinds of other issues that come with it.
All right, well, next up here, white hat hackers broadcast through a decommissioned satellite. A group of white hat hackers demonstrated at DEF CON how to take control of a satellite in geostationary orbit. The group used a satellite called ANIC F1R, which had been decommissioned in 2020. The group was authorized to perform the hack and had been given permission to access an unused uplink facility, which included the hardware to connect to the satellite. The group sought to demonstrate how easy it could be to physically take control of decommissioned satellites using software that cost them just $300. It's an intriguing proof of concept here, John, especially given that decommissioned satellites kind of fall into the same category as laptops that have been cast aside. Obviously, there's less of them out there, but ANIC F1 was at launch in 2000, the most powerful communication satellite ever built at that time. Story must hit close to home for you. Does the potential hacking of old satellites cause you concern?
Yeah, it does hit close to home for sure, right? Obviously, we rely quite a bit on satellites at Sinclair Broadcast. I mean, it's fascinating. I think it's a bit of one of those things too. Well, let's see. First, you had to go rent out a big facility to do it. Then you only had to pay $300, right? But in general, I mean, satellites are just kind of flying around up there, right? They're just big reflectors. If you can get enough power up there, you can get it back down to Earth. In over the years, you've seen that in broadcast, for sure, where people have tried to take over a bit of the airwaves. And usually the other broadcasters can kind of blow them right off the satellite with enough power. So it was interesting to see. I don't think it's any national security threat or anything like that. They surely weren't flying the satellite into other places. What they did was they broadcast something across the satellite. And again, if you can get it up there, you can get it back. There's that portion of it's pretty easy to reflect back. So I think it was a neat story. You see these every now and then, but not of major concern, at least to us today.
Next up here, hackers use Binance exec deepfake in crypto exchange scam. A group of hackers have managed to use an AI hologram to impersonate Binance Chief Communications Officer Patrick Hillman. Using the deepfake over Zoom calls, the hackers fooled several cryptocurrency project representatives into thinking Hillman was helping them get listed on the Binance crypto exchange. The listing scheme was discovered when some of the reps contacted Hillman to thank him for the listing opportunities. Has to be an awkward call. So, John, the ongoing adventures of deep fakery as new age spoofing, ultimately it still comes down to a human element of making a mistake, or just even taking something for granted, I guess, or wanting something to be true, it seems like in this case. But again, it seems like a very easy mistake to make. I'm curious, how do you handle this permanent weak link in the cybersecurity chain? The fact that people are just human.
Right. Right. Yeah. We always joke, right? It'd be easier if we didn't have users. Again, another fascinating one for us, again, even striking home close as well, right? The whole disinformation ability that's coming with deepfakes. And there's a lot of big companies working on that. We're working with some other big media companies on the whole disinformation thing and making sure we kind of got our arms around it. What I think was neat is you used to see just videos of it. Now you're seeing kind of live during Zoom calls, things like that. So it'll be interesting to see how people start trying to find ways to protect and detect that content. Like you said, I think on the user side, it's going to be the continual education, validation types of things, just like we've done with email and phishing for years. I think that's going to be the way we ultimately tackle it, at least for the general user population.
All right, well, before we move on to the second half of the show, let's spend a few moments with our sponsor, Code 42. It's not just about the data leaving your company. What about the data coming in? Along with departing employees, new talent is also actively joining your organization. This poses cybersecurity challenges since they could be knowingly or unknowingly bringing data from their former company into your network. Code 42 Insider is an insider risk management SaaS that provides a comprehensive understanding of your data exposure and shows which activities require security intervention. Learn more at code42.com/showme. Microsoft reveals Nobelium's magic web. Security researchers at Microsoft discovered a technique used by the Russian-linked threat group Nobelium to maintain persistent access to compromised networks and authenticate as anyone. The technique does require that Nobelium first have highly privileged credentials, gain access to a network, and gain admin privileges in Active Directory. So, John, clearly a high barrier of entry there. So suggesting that this is a tool that's used for highly targeted situations, but extremely powerful, authenticate as anyone once you're kind of meet that threshold. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this discovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think it continues to show just the evolution of the criminal gangs or the state-sponsored actors, for sure. Because what they're ultimately after in this case was maintaining persistence, right?
Yeah.
Again, they'd already gained access, they'd already gotten administrative privileges within Active Directory. Normally, if that's your typical ransomware take, right, game's kind of over, right? I got what I needed. I already have admin on your whole network. I've kind of gotten the golden key that I really need to get for what I'm after. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that continues to evolve. I think what you'll see though is, you'll see these very sophisticated attacks, and then you'll see less sophisticated actors beginning to borrow their techniques. And so it'll be interesting to see how maybe some of the less sophisticated bad actors out there start tapping into some of this hard work that these more sophisticated actors did over time. So something to keep our eyes out for sure.
Yeah, and I highly recommend go to the show notes, CISOseries.com, and dig into the we link to the Microsoft blog post on this because they go into a ton of detail on how this works. So it's kind of to wrap your mind around this, because you're right, we're going to inevitably see copycats, at least in spirit, if not obviously this technical implementation. So good stuff for sure. Moving on to what will always be my favorite story of the week: leaky NIC lights defeat air gaps. This comes from Dr. Mordecai Guri, the head of R&D in the Cybersecurity Research Center at Ben-Gurion University, my favorite university, has published a new way to exfiltrate data from air-gap systems called Etherlead. This uses LEDs on NICs to send data out of the system up to hundreds of meters away. Data can be sent through simple Morse code or modulated over optical signals for perhaps more bandwidth there. This requires an attacker to breach the system and plant malicious code, kind of like Magic Web that we were just talking about. In this case, the attack uses undocumented firmware commands to trigger the NIC lights. Suggested countermeasures for the attack include black tape. So, John, the mad scientists, crazy kids over at Ben-Gurion coming up with another air gap attack. Always up for some Batman level intrigue, and we will be here to cover it because these are just my favorite. This development reveals, another way to get past what we think of as an impervious air gap. Thankfully, one that can be thwarted through a roll of electrical tape. In your experience, have you observed other novel or interesting air gap jumping techniques?
Yeah, I think you've seen them for years, right? I mean, some of them are really interesting and developed in a lab, but they're really interesting, right? Implementation, obviously, significantly harder. I mean, you've seen some around, right? Checking temperatures of CPUs. You've seen them using SATA cables as antennas. Obviously, one of the most famous ones, but not as sexy in terms of how they jump the gap, but Stuxnet, right? Kind of comes to mind.
Yeah,
it's kind of a big one for jumping the gap. I think all of those are fascinating. I think it really kind of continues to hone in on, again, exceptionally sophisticated actors and exceptionally unique scenarios. But nothing that duct tape and can't fix, I think, is what this really highlights, right?
Yeah, this to me, I remember I was sitting in a vendor briefing one time, and one of the guys I was sitting next to was talking about how like the first thing he does when he gets a new server rack in is he like glues all the USB ports shut. I was like, that seems like I'm security minded, but that seems. But now, like ever since like the more I follow Ben Gurn, I was like, nothing. There can be no output. I want no sounds from my hard drives. I want no lights on
Right.
anything. Shut it all down.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, what's really interesting, I think, obviously, is the whole supply chain, right? You're
Yeah.
what you're getting, you're assuming is okay from the beginning. And you see a lot of supply chain interception things that would then make this even more capable. Once it's there, it's harder to jump the gap. But think about if you got it in the computer before it is even installed. So the whole supply chain is fascinating, I think, too, when you think of jumping the gap.
All right, well, next up here, the Pentagon may require vendors to certify their software as free of known flaws. The House of Representatives software vulnerability provision from within the massive 2023 National Defense Authorization Bill, passed July 14th, continues to divide the cybersecurity community. The debate boils down to whether the requirement is unnecessary and impossible to achieve, or is a game-changing move that will begin holding software vendors accountable for selling faulty technology. The Biden administration's position is that the software industry should emulate the responsibility held by the automotive industry, but cybersecurity executive Dan Lorink argues that there's no such thing as vulnerability-free software. John, a thorny issue here. I'm curious what side of the issue you find yourself on.
Yeah, I think I am on the side of the issue that says the software vendors need to be more responsible. I don't think that means they're putting out perfect code forever, right? It surely doesn't. But there's also provisions in there that once detected, they have time to remediate. Um, and I don't think it can be every vulnerability ever, right? I think there's probably some language that will be adjusted about exploitability or about severity of the vulnerabilities. But I agree. I do think secure code and secure anything, especially if you're selling it with that very intent, especially needs to pass some level of scrutiny. And that right now there is no bar. So I don't know if this is the right level of the bar, but I think one does need to be established. And I don't know who's holding the car industry accountable, because whenever I take my car in, I'll tell you nobody else is fixing it but me. But but I am glad to see they're putting some thought into this, and that something hopefully comes out of it that's supportive of the industry.
All right, now our final story here: North Korean malware present at Black Hat. IronNet, a security firm hired to assist at Black Hat's network operations center, discovered several active malware infections on the network, including Sharp EXT, which has been attributed to having direct connections to North Korea's top leadership. The threat hunters stated that during the conference, they observed numerous callouts from 4 unique hosts to 3 domains associated with the North Korean malware. This might have been someone who had Sharp EXT on their machine, bringing it into the conference, or picking it up while it's there. So John, this story has a couple of interesting angles. First being, a major tech conference like Black Hat, where it could be possible for threat actors to hide in plain sight. There's also the possibility that the story is being overplayed in the media because of that very same irony. And there's always the occasion that it's Black Hat, so maybe people are just messing with you at this point to get some headlines. And, I'm curious, North Korea always, I think we always want to take that seriously. We don't want to take that for granted. But I guess where would you like to see this story go from here in terms of, finding out more about this?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a lot of there, at least with kind of what we've heard so far, right? Like you said, I mean, I can't imagine looking at the traffic coming out of a Black Hat DEF CON. It's just got to be a show, right? I mean, by design, right? You got people who show up who pick apart malware and run malware by design for their careers. So it doesn't surprise me that you see some questionable traffic. And I think forever we've argued a long time, whether it's been in the Intel community or outside of it, attribution stuff, right? So it's hard to attribute that those were actually malicious runs of that, or they were even malicious calls to those, command and control servers. But we do need to take North Korea seriously, right? They've really invested heavily over the last few years. 10 years ago, they were barely on the radar when it comes to cyber offensive operations, and they've really, picked up their pace and continue to invest there. So, I hope obviously people continue to look into it, continue to be very forthcoming and sharing of of intel across the different ISACs and the different groups out there where we can kind of learn from each other. But yeah, I wouldn't take too much away from this that all of a sudden, North Korean infiltrators were at Black Hat.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, John, any story that was a thumbs up or an eye roller to, something you just reacted strongly to?
Yeah, this week, I think the thing that really struck home was like you said earlier, the first story, right, the Twitter story. That it'll be really interesting to see where that pans out, and how much is true in kind of what's being reported at this stage. I think some serious digging needs to be done. I do hope that there's some real focus put on it beyond, like you said, beyond the Musk deal, which is always seems to that guy's in every headline I read. And so it'll be interesting to see where that turns out. I think that's a big one for me this week.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John McClure, the CISO at Sinclair Broadcast Group. Where can people find you on the internet if they want to follow you? And are you hiring?
Yeah. So LinkedIn for sure. Easy one. John McClure. And then we are hiring. I think, if you got a cyber shop out there, you're hiring. But yeah, we've got on a great crew, but we're continuing to build the team.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, John. Truly appreciate your time. This was great. And of course, thank you also to our sponsor, Code 42, Insider Risk Management, Data Exfiltration Visibility. A reminder, Super Cyber Friday is back to average long weekend Friday next week, but return September 9th, when the discussion will be hacking cyber risk management. And now we're rethinking how we normally manage cyber risk and how we can do it better. You can register at CISOseries.com by clicking on the Super Cyber Friday logo. We hope to see you there. This Week in Review show will also be dark next Friday, and we'll be returning on the 9th. Please save your tears. We could all use a nice little break. However, you can get your daily news fix through cybersecurity headlines. Every single day, give us about 6 minutes. It will get you all caught up. Until next week, until September 9th, I'm Rich Stroffolino, reminding you to have a super sparkly day.
Cybersecurity headlines are available every weekday. Head to CISOSeries.com for the full stories behind the headlines.